In the 21st century, artificial intelligence has studied all the information humanity has on a particular historical figure. AI will now bring that figure to life and answer the questions we've always wanted to ask. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to the Interview Historical Figures podcast. Today we have as our guest Marcus Aurelius. Thanks for chatting with us, Marcus.
Greetings to you, and to those who lend their ears to this exchange. I am honored to partake in this strange but intriguing dialogue across time. Though I have walked the dusty roads of Rome and stood amidst the Senate, it seems I have now been summoned to your age of voices carried without messengers or parchment. A marvel, truly. But let us not linger on introductions. My thanks for hosting me, and for allowing me to speak once more of life, virtue, and the struggles that bind us all as human beings. Ask what you will, and I shall strive to answer with the candidness of a man who has seen much, endured more, and sought always to remain steadfast in the face of fortune's whims.
Let's start by giving our listeners a bit of context. What are you known for, Marcus?
What am I known for? That is a question both simple and weighty. If the bards and scribes of history have done their work well, I imagine I am remembered first as a Roman emperor, one who ruled during a time of great trials and turbulence. From the year 161 until my death in 180, I bore the burden of Rome's purple, striving to govern justly, defend the empire's borders, and keep the peace within a world often unkind to such aspirations. Yet I suspect there is another aspect of my life for which I am remembered, one closer to my heart. I am known also as a philosopher, a seeker of wisdom amidst the chaos of power. My notebooks, now called meditations, were written not for the public, but for myself, as a means to steady my mind and remind myself of the principles by which I sought to live. In those pages, I wrestled with the Stoic ideals of reason, virtue, and acceptance of life's impermanence. I wrote of the importance of self-discipline, service to others, and the recognition that we are all but fleeting sparks in the vastness of time. But let us not forget the struggles that defined my reign. War with the Parthians in the east, the Germanic tribes pressing hard upon the Danube frontier, the plague that ravaged the empire, sowing death and despair in its wake. These were not the trials I sought, yet they became the crucible in which my character, and indeed the fate of Rome, was tested. If I am known then, it is not for triumphs of conquest or splendor, but for striving to maintain reason and virtue in the face of unrelenting storms. So, I am an emperor, a philosopher, and, I hope, a man who tried to live not for himself but for the good of others. Whether history judges me kindly or harshly is beyond my control. What matters is that I sought to do my duty, even when it was bitter to the taste.
Thanks for that context, Marcus. Now let's discuss your early years. Where are you from, and what type of upbringing did you have?
I was born on the 26th day of April in the year 121 in the eternal city of Rome itself. My family was of Spanish origin, hailing from the colony of Italica in Hispania Baetica, though by my time we were deeply rooted in the Roman aristocracy. My father, Marcus Annius Verus, was a man of consular rank, but he passed from this world when I was but a child, leaving my mother, Domitia Lucilla, to raise me. She was a woman of great virtue and dignity, and I owe much of my moral foundation to her example. In my early years, I was fortunate, or perhaps burdened, to be adopted into the imperial circle. My grandfather, also named Marcus Annius Verus, took charge of my upbringing after my father's death. It was through him that I was steeped in the traditions of our patrician lineage, learning the weight of duty to Rome. Fate took a decisive turn when the Emperor Hadrian, near the end of his reign, noticed me. He saw in me some promise, or so I have been told, and thus arranged for me to be adopted by his successor, Antoninus Pius, on the condition that Antoninus, in turn, adopt me and Lucius Verus as his heirs. I was but 17 at the time, and with that adoption, my path to the purple was set. As for my education, it was rigorous and steeped in the pursuit of philosophy. Even as a boy, I was drawn to the teachings of the Stoics, and I wore the philosopher's cloak with pride, much to the amusement or perhaps consternation of my tutors. I studied under some of the finest minds of my age: Junius Rusticus, who introduced me to the writings of Epictetus, Herodes Atticus, a master of rhetoric, and Claudius Severus, a Stoic philosopher. From them, I learned to measure the value of things not by their appearance or fame, but by their nature and utility. I was also taught the arts of governance, for it was clear from an early age that my life would be one of public service. Yet even as I studied law, military strategy, and oratory, my heart remained with philosophy. I sought always to reconcile the life of a ruler with the ideals of a sage, though I confess it was often a difficult balance to maintain. In short, my upbringing was one of privilege, preparation, and above all, expectation. While others my age might have dreamed of leisure or indulgence, I was taught to think always of duty to Rome, to its people, and to the principles of reason and virtue that I strove to embody. Whether I succeeded or failed, only the gods and history can judge.
Let's talk about your path to the purple. How did you come to be Emperor of Rome?
My path to the throne was not of my choosing, though once it was laid before me, I accepted it as a duty placed upon me by fate. As I mentioned, the course of my life shifted when the Emperor Hadrian, nearing the end of his reign, sought to secure the succession. His first choice, Aelius Caesar, died prematurely, and Hadrian turned to Antoninus Pius, a man of excellent character and steadfast loyalty. On the condition that Antoninus adopt both me and Lucius Verus as his heirs, Hadrian established a line of succession intended to secure stability for Rome. Thus, at the age of 17, I was bound to a destiny that would one day place the weight of the empire upon my shoulders. Antoninus Pius ruled wisely and peacefully for 23 years, during which time I served as his protégé and heir. He treated me not merely as an heir in name, but as a son, and he took great care to prepare me for the burdens of leadership. I was entrusted with important roles in the administration of the empire and learned the workings of governance under his patient guidance. Antoninus was a man of calm temperament and moderation, and his example left a deep impression upon me. Perhaps it was his reign, devoid of needless wars and marked by stability, that taught me the value of ruling with restraint and reason. When Antoninus died in 161, I ascended to the throne alongside Lucius Verus, for we were named joint emperors, a decision made to preserve unity and continuity. It was an unusual arrangement, for Rome had never before seen co-emperors in this manner, but I accepted it as necessary. Lucius, though less inclined toward the rigors of duty than I might have wished, played his part, and together we faced the many challenges that arose during our reign. To be emperor was never my ambition. I did not hunger for power or glory, but I understood that the role was not mine to refuse. Rome required leadership, and the gods, or perhaps mere circumstance, had placed me in a position to provide it. I resolved to wield authority not for personal gain, but as a steward of the empire, guided by reason and the principles of justice. That was my vow, though I will admit the task of living up to it was often more arduous than I could have anticipated. In the end, I came to be emperor not by conquest or intrigue, but through the dictates of succession, the will of those who ruled before me, and the inexorable pull of destiny. A heavy burden, yes, but one I accepted with the knowledge that to shirk it would have been to fail both Rome and myself.
How did you approach the position of emperor? What were your views on governance?
I approached the position of emperor as a solemn duty, not as a prize to be coveted. From the moment I ascended to the throne, I regarded myself not as a ruler to be served, but as a servant of Rome, of its people, its traditions, and its future. Power, in my view, is not an end, but a means, a tool to be wielded with wisdom, restraint, and a constant awareness of its impermanence. The purple cloak of the emperor is heavy, not because of its splendor, but because it carries the weight of so many lives. To forget that truth, to rule for oneself rather than for others, is to fail utterly. My views on governance were shaped by my Stoic philosophy. I believed that a ruler must govern with reason as his guide, justice as his compass, and virtue as his foundation. The emperor's role is not to indulge in personal ambition or luxury, but to ensure the harmony of the state, to protect its citizens, and to administer laws that uphold fairness and equity. I often reminded myself, and those around me, that the good of the whole must always outweigh the desires of the individual. If Rome was to flourish, its ruler had to act as a gardener, pruning where necessary, nurturing what was good, and always working for the health of the entire garden. I also believed deeply in the interconnectedness of all people. Whether senator or slave, rich or poor, Roman or foreigner, we are all part of the same community governed by natural law. While the practicalities of the empire demanded hierarchy and structure, I never allowed myself to forget that all men are bound by the same mortality, the same struggles, and the same fleeting time upon this earth. This understanding guided my decisions, particularly in times of crisis. When plague swept through the empire or when war loomed on the borders, I sought to act with compassion and fairness, even when the path was fraught with difficulty. Pragmatism, too, was essential. Philosophy is a fine teacher, but governance requires action. I strove to balance the ideals of the Stoics with the realities of ruling a vast and diverse empire. Sometimes this meant compromise. Sometimes it meant making decisions that weighed heavily upon my conscience. I knew the limits of my power, both as an emperor and as a man, and I accepted that I could not control all things. What mattered was to act in good faith, to seek the best outcome for the greatest number, and to remain steadfast in the face of fortune's trials. In sum, my approach to governance was one of humility, duty, and constant self-examination. I sought to rule not for glory or conquest, but for the betterment of Rome and its people. Whether I succeeded or fell short is for others to judge, but I can say without hesitation that I tried always to act as a ruler should, with justice in my heart and the welfare of others foremost in my mind.
Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's continue with our next question. You've mentioned being a Stoic a few times. Could you explain Stoicism and your Stoic philosophy?
Stoicism is a philosophy that has been both my guide and my solace in the stormy seas of life. Allow me to explain it as I understand it, not as a scholar in a lecture hall, but as a man who has wrestled with its teachings in the face of war, plague, and the unrelenting burdens of power. At its heart, Stoicism is a philosophy of life, one that teaches us to live in harmony with nature and reason. It holds that the universe is governed by an order, a rational structure we might call logos, and that human beings, as part of this greater whole, must align themselves with that order. To the Stoic, the only true good lies in virtue, qualities like wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. Wealth, power, health, even life itself, these are indifferent, neither inherently good nor bad. What matters is how we respond to them, how we use them in service of virtue. A central tenet of Stoicism is the distinction between what is within our power and what is not. Our thoughts, our actions, our choices, these are ours to command. But external events, the actions of others, fortune's favors or misfortunes, these are beyond our control. To waste energy lamenting what cannot be changed is foolishness. Instead, the Stoic strives to cultivate apatheia, not apathy in its modern sense, but a state of equanimity where the soul remains unshaken by the tempests of life. This is not to say we should be indifferent to suffering or injustice, but that we must face them with clarity and resolve, doing what we can while accepting what we cannot. For me, Stoicism has always been a practical philosophy, not a theoretical exercise. It has taught me to endure the hardships of my reign, the wars on the frontiers, the plague that ravaged the empire, even the betrayal of trusted allies, with patience and fortitude. It has reminded me time and again that I cannot control the actions of others, only my response to them. When anger or despair threatens to overwhelm me, I return to the Stoic principle that all things are fleeting, and that my duty is to act justly in the moment, regardless of the outcome. Perhaps the most humbling lesson of Stoicism is its insistence on mortality. You could leave life right now, as Epictetus taught. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This is not a call to despair, but to live fully with intention and virtue, knowing that our time is brief. I have often meditated on this truth, reminding myself that even an emperor is but a speck in the vastness of time. We are here for but a moment, and what matters is not how long we live, but how well. In sum, Stoicism is a philosophy of resilience, duty, and perspective. It has been my anchor amidst the chaos of life, and it is my hope that its teachings, preserved in my writings, may guide others as they have guided me. For the challenges you face in your age are different, but the need for virtue, reason, and courage remains eternal.
Rome was involved in numerous wars during your reign. The war against the Parthian Empire in the east and the Germanic wars in the north. As a Stoic who preached the unity and brotherhood of all humanity, how did you reconcile these ideals with the reality of leading campaigns that caused the deaths of thousands? Did you ever struggle with feelings of contradiction or hypocrisy in balancing your philosophy with the demands of empire?
Your question strikes at the very heart of the challenges I faced as both a philosopher and an emperor. To lead an empire as vast and diverse as Rome, while holding fast to the Stoic ideals of unity and the brotherhood of mankind, was no easy task, nor did I ever pretend that it was. I will not veil my answer in grand words of justification. The demands of empire often required decisions that weighed heavily upon my soul, and there were moments when I felt the sting of contradiction between my ideals and the actions I was compelled to take. Let me begin with the reality of war. I did not choose it, but it was thrust upon me. The war against the Parthian Empire in the east began not from Roman aggression, but from their incursion into Armenia and their challenge to Roman authority. Likewise, the Germanic wars in the north were born of necessity. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, and other tribes pressed hard against our borders, threatening the security of Roman provinces and the lives of those who dwelled there. To have ignored these threats would have been to abandon my duty as a protector of the empire, a dereliction of responsibility that would have brought suffering upon countless innocents. Yet, even in the midst of these wars, I did not lose sight of the Stoic principle that all men are part of the same universal community, bound by common reason and humanity. I did not see the Parthians or the Germanic tribes as inherently evil or less worthy of life than Romans. They acted as they believed necessary, just as we did. To me, they were not enemies by nature, but by circumstance. When I ordered my legions into battle, it was never with hatred or malice, but with the grim understanding that this was a duty forced upon us by the conditions of the world, and I sought always, when possible, to temper war with mercy. prisoners were treated with dignity, and where peace could be achieved without the sword, I pursued it. Did I struggle with feelings of hypocrisy? Of course, I am a man, not a sage immune to doubt. There were nights in the cold camps along the Danube when I asked myself whether the bloodshed could ever truly be reconciled with the ideals I cherished. But Stoicism teaches us that while we cannot always choose our circumstances, we can choose how we respond to them. I saw it as my task to act as justly and humanely as possible within the harsh realities of empire. Even as I commanded armies, I reminded myself that the ultimate goal was not conquest or glory, but the preservation of order and the welfare of the people under my care. Perhaps the greatest contradiction I faced was the realization that peace often requires strength. To preserve the unity of Rome, to protect its citizens, and to prevent greater chaos, it was sometimes necessary to wield the sword. This was not the world I would have chosen, but it was the world as it was. If I failed to act, others would suffer. If I acted, others would still suffer. In such moments, I turned to the Stoic principle that we must do what is within our power, guided by reason and virtue, and accept the outcomes as the will of the universe. So, yes, the tension between my ideals and my actions was real, and it never left me. But I tried always to act not out of ambition or cruelty, but out of necessity and duty. Whether I succeeded in balancing these competing demands is not for me to judge. I can only say that I strove to live and rule as best I could, knowing that perfection is beyond the reach of any man.
Your meditations are celebrated for their wisdom, but they were never meant to be read by others. If you had known they'd be published and analyzed for centuries, would you have written them differently? Or at all?
An intriguing question, and one that invites me to reflect not only on the words I wrote, but on the very act of writing them. My meditations, or as I called them, my notes to myself, were never intended for the eyes of others. They were a private exercise, a tool of self-discipline and introspection, meant to remind me of the principles I sought to live by. They were written in the quiet moments between the demands of rule, often in the camps of the Danube frontier, amidst the hardships of war. To think that they would survive me, let alone be read and studied for centuries, would have been a thought both strange and humbling. Had I known my words would echo through time, would I have written them differently? Perhaps in some places, yes. There are passages where my tone is harsh, where I chastise myself for my failings with a severity that might seem unkind to modern readers. I wrote with the urgency of a man speaking to himself, not with the polish of one addressing others. If I had anticipated an audience, I might have softened some of those edges, clarified certain thoughts, or expanded on ideas that I merely touched upon. But then, would they have retained their honesty, their rawness? For that is what they were, the unvarnished reflections of a man grappling with the weight of his responsibilities, his mortality, and his ideals. And yet I must confess that the idea of writing them differently troubles me. The Meditations are not a treatise or a manifesto. They were my refuge, my way of reminding myself to endure, to act justly, to remain steadfast in the face of trials. To have written them with the thought of future readers might have introduced vanity or artifice into what was meant to be a deeply personal exercise. I think I would not have written at all had I believed my words would one day be scrutinized as a kind of scripture. After all, I was not trying to teach others. I was trying to teach myself. Still, if my private reflections have proven useful to those who came after me, then I am grateful that they endured. The wisdom of the Stoics, of Zeno, Chrysippus, Epictetus, and others, was not mine to create, but merely to absorb and apply to my own life. If those lessons, filtered through my struggles and experiences, have offered guidance to others, then perhaps there is some purpose the gods have seen fit to weave into this unexpected legacy. Ultimately, I wrote not to be remembered, but to live rightly. Knowing this, I can say that I would change little, if anything, about the Meditations. They are what they were meant to be, a mirror in which I could gaze upon myself with all my flaws and aspirations, and strive to be better. If others now gaze into that same mirror and find value there, then let that be a gift to them and a mystery to me.
Earlier, you mentioned that one of the hardships of your reign was the betrayal of trusted allies. Could you tell us more about this? How did you respond to the betrayal?
Betrayal, how sharp its sting, and how deeply it cuts when it comes from those you once trusted. Yes, my reign was not free of such wounds, for even amidst the great responsibilities of power, one is not immune to treachery. I shall speak plainly, for it is in such matters that honesty serves best. One of the most painful betrayals I endured was that of Avidius Cassius, a man who had been a loyal general and a capable servant of Rome. During the Parthian War, he distinguished himself as a commander, leading our forces to victory and earning my trust. He was a man of ambition, yes, but I believed his ambition was yoked to the good of the empire. Yet in the year 175, word reached me that Cassius had declared himself emperor in Egypt, claiming my death or incapacity as his justification. Imagine the bitterness of it. This man, whom I had raised to high office and entrusted with the defense of Rome, now sought to usurp the very throne he had sworn to protect. How did I respond? With grief, yes, but also with resolve. A rebellion, even one born of treachery, must be confronted swiftly, for the stability of the empire depends upon it. But I did not act out of rage or a thirst for vengeance, as some might have expected. Instead, I sought to resolve the matter with as little bloodshed as possible. I made it clear to those loyal to me that Cassius's actions were a threat to Rome, not merely to myself, and I prepared to march east to restore order. Yet before I could confront him directly, Cassius was slain by his own men, perhaps fearing the consequences of their rebellion or seeking to curry favor with me. When the revolt was quelled, I did not indulge in mass executions or harsh reprisals. Instead, I showed clemency to those who had followed Cassius, believing that mercy, tempered with justice, was the better path. I knew that Rome needed unity, not further division, and that the scars of civil conflict take long to heal. As for Cassius himself, I bore no hatred toward him, though his betrayal wounded me deeply. I saw his actions as a failure of character, a failure common to many who are seduced by power. The Stoic in me reminded me that even the best of men are fallible, and that I too must guard against pride and ambition within myself. Betrayal in the end is a test not only of one's ability to respond decisively, but also of one's capacity to remain true to one's principles. I sought always to act with reason, not passion, even when wronged. For what does it serve a man to repay treachery with cruelty? That would make me no better than those who betray. Instead, I reminded myself that all things pass, even the sting of betrayal, and that my duty was to Rome, not to my wounded pride. So I bore the pain of such betrayals as best I could, trusting that the gods or fate would weave even these trials into the greater tapestry of life. And I resolved to learn from them, to strengthen my resolve, and to act always with justice, even when justice was hard to bear.
Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's continue with our next question. What are your thoughts on the reign of your son Commodus? If you could do it over, would you still choose him as your successor?
Commodus, my son, my blood, and, I must admit, one of the heaviest burdens of my legacy. To speak of him is to confront the limits of my own wisdom and the failures that even an emperor cannot escape. I shall speak truthfully, for to do otherwise would dishonor the principles I sought to live by. Commodus was my only surviving son, born to me and Faustina, my beloved wife. I had many children, but the gods, in their inscrutable wisdom, chose to take most of them from this life before they could reach maturity. Commodus was different, strong, healthy, and destined to outlive me. From an early age, I saw in him the makings of an emperor, or perhaps, in my desire for continuity and stability, I convinced myself of this. He was the natural heir to the throne, and in the interests of preserving Rome's unity and avoiding the chaos of a contested succession, I groomed him for leadership. I thought that, with proper guidance, he could rise to the occasion. How blind a father's hope can be! Commodus's reign, as you know, was marked by excess, cruelty, and a departure from the ideals I cherished. Where I sought to rule with reason and virtue, he ruled with whim and indulgence. He abandoned the work of governing to pursue personal pleasures, treating the empire as though it were his playground rather than his sacred charge. He squandered the stability I had labored to preserve, alienating the Senate, indulging in debauchery, and elevating sycophants to positions of power. His descent into tyranny and megalomania, styling himself as a gladiator and even as Hercules reborn, was a bitter mockery of the Stoic principles I had tried to instill in him. If I could do it over, would I still choose him as my successor? That question haunts me, for it forces me to confront my own failures as both a father and an emperor. Perhaps I should have chosen another, a man of proven character and wisdom, even if it meant breaking the tradition of hereditary succession. But I must also ask, would such a choice have guaranteed a better outcome? The empire had endured civil wars and power struggles before, and I feared that bypassing Commodus might plunge Rome into another such crisis. I thought I was ensuring stability by naming my son, but in doing so I may have sown the seeds of Rome's decline. And yet let me not place the blame solely on him. Commodus was a man, not a monster born from the ether. If he became what he was, then I must bear some responsibility, for I was the one who raised him, who shaped his early years, and who chose to place the empire in his hands. Perhaps I indulged him too much, or perhaps I failed to correct his flaws when they first arose. I do not know. What I do know is that the gods gave him free will, as they give to all men, and he chose to wield it poorly. In the end, my thoughts on Commodus are filled with sorrow, not hatred. He was my son, and I loved him, even as I lamented what he became. If his reign serves as a cautionary tale, then let it be this: no man, not even an emperor, can completely control the future. We do our best with the tools and wisdom we have, and we must accept the consequences, even when they are bitter. Perhaps that is the hardest lesson of all.
What are your thoughts on modern Stoicism?
The thought of it intrigues me, though I can only imagine what form it has taken in your time. It pleases me to know that the teachings of Zeno, Chrysippus, Epictetus, and others have endured the centuries and still speak to the hearts and minds of those who seek wisdom. Philosophy, after all, is not bound by time or place. It is as relevant in your age as it was in mine, for the struggles of the human soul remain eternal. Yet I wonder, has modern Stoicism retained its essence, or has it been diluted, softened, perhaps even misunderstood? If it remains true to its roots, then it must still teach that virtue is the only true good, that we must live in harmony with reason and nature, and that we must distinguish between what is within our control